Hi everybody, welcome back to Spirea Herbs and Snail Trails Homestead. We had our first official hard frost on Friday, and while we could have covered the garden and tried to save the plants, we decided to let things rest for the year. So I have probably close to 40 or 50 pounds of green tomatoes. So today I am going to be making green tomato salsa, also known as salsa verde. So I hope you can join me and learn how to make this super tasty, delicious salsa that will help you use up your green tomatoes too. So we have a wide variety of green tomatoes, and obviously I have to pick out the ones that are ripe. But what's kind of nice about salsa verde is most green tomatoes don't have a lot, like see, squeeze them, they don't have a lot of juice in them. So you don't have to be as picky with your variety of green tomatoes as you do with regular salsa, because you say like a big slicer like this one. You don't want to use this when it's ripe to make regular salsa because it just has too much juice in it, and you're going to be boiling and boiling, or you're just going to end up with watery salsa. Whereas when they're green, see, like they're still like, I'm squeezing this quite hard and there's basically no juice. So it's kind of nice. You can use your cherry tomatoes, your dicing, or your slicers. You can use all of your heirlooms, and you can use your paste tomatoes, anything that's green for this. And you can even add a couple of, if you've got a couple of red tomatoes and you're super sick of cherry tomatoes at this point, feel free to use those up as well. So I just wanted to show you our harvest, and this is it's a pretty big bucket full of green tomatoes. So I'm probably going to be doubling or tripling the recipe that I will share with you today. All right, everybody, let's talk about our ingredients. But first things first, always make sure that you're using canning safe recipes that have been tested by the home preservation folks. Ball or Bernardin are really great resources for that. So this is my Ball Complete Book of Home Preserving. Of course, it's backwards because I'm in selfie mode. And it's page 210 where I have my salsa verde. So this is the recipe I'm going to be using today. These recipes are tested to ensure they're going to be safe and that the pH and acidity levels are at a safe level for water bath canning or for pressure canning, to ensure you're not going to start growing nasty bacteria and stuff like that in your home canned goods. So you really want to avoid that. So this recipe, the salsa verde or the green tomato salsa, I always like to can my salsa in the pint size or 500 milliliter size jars. If you decide to go with this size jar, you're going to make about 3 of them with this recipe. If you decide to go with the 250 ml jars, so the half pints, you're going to make about 8 of them, it says. Or sorry, it says 6, obviously half. So like I said, I like to use them in this size. I find that we go through it fast enough and it never really spoils in the fridge. So for one batch, you are going to need approximately 7 cups of chopped green tomatoes. And obviously, once I chop them, it'll be slightly less than this. So I always measure them out after I've chopped them. You're going to need 2 cups of finely chopped red onion. You're going to need about 2 cloves of garlic. Sometimes I add a little bit more. I try to always stick with the recipes as closely as possible. So again, that's 7 cups of chopped green tomatoes, 2 cups of finely chopped red onion. You're going to need about 2 cloves of garlic, maybe 3. Your jalapenos are going to be to your spice tolerance. So the recipe states anywhere from 5 to 10 jalapenos finely chopped in your recipe. So if you want a spicier salsa, you're obviously going to want to use more. If you prefer milder salsas, then go with 5. And know that most of the spice in a jalapeno pepper is in the seeds. So if you take a large amount of the seeds out as well, that's going to help with the spice level. The recipe also calls for a half a cup of lime juice. And I wish we had access to organic where we do, but we don't. You absolutely want to use bottled lime juice. And this is the same if your recipe calls for lemon juice. You want to use bottled. And the reason for this is that in most cases, the lemon juice and the lime juice in recipes are in there to ensure that the acidity levels are safe for home canning. So you're reaching a particular pH that's going to be safe for home canning. And because lemons and limes are not created equal, you want to use bottled because they have safety standards for a particular pH that they have to reach in order to bottle it and sell it. So the only way to guarantee that you're getting the pH acidity levels that you need for your recipe is to use bottled. If you can find organic, even better. Sometimes it can be hard when you live rural like we do and you don't always have access to. So half a cup of bottled lime juice, half a cup of chopped cilantro. Now, we don't have cilantro, so parsley is a perfectly acceptable substitute in this case. So a half a cup of finely chopped parsley. You're going to need about 2 teaspoons of cumin. You're going to need about 1 teaspoon of dried oregano. You're going to need 1 teaspoon of freshly ground pepper and a teaspoon of freshly ground salt. I like using Himalayan sea salt. So just to go over those again, and I'll make sure I post them off to the side in written instructions, that's 7 cups of chopped green tomatoes, 5 to 10 finely chopped jalapenos based on your spice tolerance, 2 cups of chopped red onion, 2 garlic cloves, either pressed or finely minced, your choice. You're going to need half a cup of lime juice, bottled lime juice, 2 teaspoons of ground cumin, 1 teaspoon of dried oregano, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 1 teaspoon of freshly ground pepper. So I'm going to process all these ingredients and put them in my stock pot. Once you combine everything into your cooking pot, your stock pot, you're going to bring it to a boil and stirring consistently for about 5 minutes or so and then remove from heat. So it says to bring the tomatoes, peppers, onion, garlic, and lime juice to a boil, and then add your spices and continue to simmer that for 5 minutes. So that would be the instruction. So I'm going to start doing that. I'll come back and show you what it looks like. And then we will go through the canning process. So again, all of these ingredients and what I've just covered is going to make you 3 pint-sized jars or 6 half-pint jars. So depending on how much you make, like I said, I'm likely going to be tripling, quadrupling this recipe because I've got a lot of green tomatoes to work through. So I'll also show you some tricks for processing these quickly if you have access to electricity and a food processor. Okay, so we aren't off-grid. I have electricity. See, there's a plug. And when it comes to doing things like chopping large amounts of vegetables for canning recipes, I love my food processor. It makes things so much faster, and I'll show you. And of course, if you don't have access to a food processor, you're going to be chopping by hand, or you can get one of those, one of the homesteaders channels that I follow is Off Grid Doug and Stacy. And Stacy, I think, has like a hand crank chopper. It's on my list to get. But in this case, I just pulse. And already, I mean, look at that, one pulse. They're already starting to chop. So it's up to you on how many tomato chunks you want in your salsa. Do you like a finely diced salsa or do you like a chunky salsa? So that's your preference, but if you can use a food processor, especially if you're going to be tripling, quadrupling a batch like this, you're going to be chopping for a long time. So I definitely recommend using a food processor or one of those hand crank food choppers if you have one. So I've got my onions, tomatoes, peppers, and lime juice almost ready to come to a boil right there. So once they come to a boil, I'll add the parsley or cilantro, your choice, and the spices. And then you're going to continue to boil that for about 5 minutes. As that's going on, I will be washing and cleaning my jars and prepping my canner and getting everything ready. So if you're not already familiar, the standards for sterilization for home canning changed in 2015. And if your processing time is greater than 10 minutes in a water bath canner or pressure canner, you can skip the sterilization part for your jars. So you used to have to boil your jars for 10-15 minutes. And what they found was that as long as the processing time was greater than 10 minutes, the jars self-sterilized. So it was really a redundant process, quite amazing. Now you still, of course, want to wash them out with hot soapy water. And right before I fill them, I pour boiling water over them just so that the glass is already used to hot temperatures, because I'm going to be packing it with hot food. And you still want to, of course, wash your lids. But you can skip that sterilization process, which is nice. So soon I'll be adding, I can hear it, it's gonna boil soon. You can probably hear it too. So soon I'll be adding my spices and my parsley, and then we will tackle the actual canning process. All right, so my salsa is ready, nice and hot, and my jars are also nice and hot. As I mentioned in the previous segment, I like to pour boiling water over the jars, and so that way they're used to, like, they're quite hot and warm to the touch. So they're used to hot items, and now hot food's gonna go into them. So this way, buddy. This way. Actually, it'd be better if you stood here. I got a little helper today, and he wants to be in the video. So, oh, there he goes. So we're gonna start by filling up our jars. And so what you're gonna need, obviously, are canning approved jars, a canning rack and a canner of some kind, clean and washed.
With a funnel.
Yes, a wide mouth funnel, thank you. Clean and washed lids, canning rings, a soup ladle I find works easiest for filling our canning jars, and some sort of non-reactive utensil. I really like using chopsticks. And this is to get the air bubbles out. So careful, things are going to be hot, okay? Okay. Oh, and of course a clean cloth, and you can either have it dry or have it soaked with a little bit of vinegar. That works as well. So we're going to start by filling our jars. And you, of course, want to leave about 1 inch of headspace. This is to make sure that we've got room for expansion. So don't fill your jars up all the way to the top.
Just about that much.
Yeah. Sometimes I have to take some out because I overfill, like I did in this case. So I have to go get a spoon because I overfilled.
Oh, and this thing actually does that to keep the jars in. I'm going to have to move it to help Mom do that.
So this jar is nice and full. Like I said, I've left at least 1 inch. And what I'll do now with my chopstick is kind of just stir it around to make sure there's no air bubbles anywhere in the canning jars. And
that's important.
Another really important step, buddy, is to wipe the rims and the sides of your jars. And
that is very important.
It's important because it removes any potential food particles. The #1 cause of seal failure with your jars is that something got in between the rim of the jar and the lid, and it wasn't able to properly seal. So you want to then screw your bands on fingertip tight, resist the urge to over tighten, and then start filling up your canning rack. So my canner can fit about 11 jars. So probably this is supposed to make a dozen. One of my jars will probably just end up going into the fridge once it cools down, instead of me running the canner for just a single jar. So the processing time for pints, oh, that's hot, pints or half pint jars, it doesn't matter, is 20 minutes. Now, if you live at a higher elevation, you're of course going to have to adjust your canning time for the elevation that's really hot, Bubba, okay? To adjust your canning time for the elevation at which you live. But if you're at sea level, then you're processing for 20 minutes. And that's just in a water bath canner. Then of course you're going to follow the same protocols you do for all of your other canning. Leave your jars on the counter for about 24 hours. Then you're going to remove the rims, wash your jars down, label them, and store them in your pantry. Usually after about 2 hours though, I check the seals to make sure that we didn't have any seal failures. Because I like to catch them in the first couple of hours. If I can do that, then I can move them to the fridge and store them there if I did have any seal failures. Whereas if you leave them out on the counter for a full 24 hours, your food's spoiled then. So I always check just to make sure the lid popped down, but then I don't move them. We've got a spot in the kitchen that the boys know not to touch Mom's jars if they're there, that they're hot out of the canner. So I'm going to continue filling the jars, and then we'll show you the canning process a little bit, and that's about it. So my canner's just about at a full boil. There it is back there. And so just a quick tip, if you have hard water like we do, you may notice that your jars come out almost dusty with calcium and mineral buildup on them. A really great tip is to add just a splash of like white vinegar to your canning water. And that will help with any kind of mineral buildup you have on your jars. Our water's pretty bad, so it comes out, like I don't mind a little bit and then washing it off after, but ours come out like almost white, that they're so cloudy. So the white vinegar really helps. So these will process for about 20 minutes at a full rolling boil. And then, like I said, I actually sit the canning rack on, so I stop the timer, turn the heat off, and I sit the canning rack on the rim, like on the rim of the canner, for about 5 minutes or so, and then I take my jars out, just so it's a gradual adjustment to the cooler temperature in my kitchen. Especially with pressure canning, it's really important to do that because it's a lot hotter in a pressure canner than it is a water bath canner. So thank you so much for joining me and learning how to make green tomato salsa. Here at Snail Trails Homestead, we do our best not to waste anything. So it actually only used up about, let's see if I can show you down there, about half of my green tomatoes. So the rest I'll probably dice and freeze. We really like green tomato chili. And I'm going to do a bit of research and see if I can diced green tomatoes as well. So don't waste anything, you know, green tomatoes are still very, very useful. If you've got a nice big slicer that's a green tomato, you can also make fried green tomatoes if you've never done that before. I'll post a link to my recipe below. It is delicious. We don't eat a lot of fried foods, but we try to have that at least once a year. So thanks again for watching. Feel free to subscribe to my channel, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all that jazz. And Monkey Man says bye as well.
Bye, 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 bye.
Thank you again for joining us, and happy canning, guys.